This is a brain disease that is largely genetically based. I would say that over 90% of the patients we admit here are aware of a family member with addiction.
Well, my father was alcoholic, and my grandfather was, and a good deal, not all of my uncles, but a number of my uncles were. So there was a lot of history.
I could say as a scientist, and my colleagues would back me up, that genes now have a higher dominance in terms of causing certain behavioral patterns than the environment.
I'd say a majority of people obviously come from very severe abusive situations that cause that deep brokenness.
Well, I have to admit, there were a couple of times, just some things that kind of hurt really bad, you know, as a kid. My mom she was a Jehovah's Witness. It ruined our family life. You know? Every time they kicked me out, my mother, the rules of the religion don't let you, even your mother, deal with you. You know, she won't sit at the same table and eat with you. You know, she won't. It's like, and I always loved my mother very deeply. And she just separated herself from me.
Whether it's to cocaine or it's to heroin or it's gambling or pornography, whatever it is, it's always a symptom of a problem elsewhere, if you look at it from the psyche's point of view. Which isn't to say that with addiction you don't start a sequela of events physiologically that have their own, pattern to them.
It's opening you up. Cocaine is causing dopamine release, which is increasing your well-being again, your feeling, your euphoria. It's like sort of leading towards an orgasm, and you're in heaven.
This very important part of the brain, the mesolimbic circuit, is at the base of the brain. And what's happening there, when you have a pleasurable stimulus, dopamine, represented here in these little packets, are released into the synaptic cleft. They bind here, and then there's a cascade of reactions that cause a pleasurable sensation. The dopamine is then taken back up through these transporter proteins, and everything goes back to normal. If you take something that stimulates dopamine secretion, whether it be cocaine or nicotine, the dopamine levels go up, they would fall down, it's metabolized and taken back up, and the levels come back to normal.
We found the first gene to associate with severe alcoholism. And what we found is the gene that controls the receptor was in a form whereby it only made a limited amount of these dopamine receptors. So you are not going to be able to cope, okay, as well as somebody that has the normal complement of the dopamine receptors. So that's what puts you at this ease.
When I first started in this field over 20 years ago, an alcoholic would tell me that they would take a drink before they would go to work. I would say, well, how could you function? And the patient would tell me, I drink so I can feel normal. And it took me many years to understand that what's probably happening is the drug is then boosting the dopamine levels back up to the point that someone feels able to function.
There's a neurosis and the person has lost contact with what makes their life meaningful, and they're looking for that through the addiction, through the alcohol or through the drug in some form.
By the time I was 36, I couldn't hold a job, I couldn't hold a place to live, and so I was pushing a basket, homeless for 2 years, you know.
When you don't believe in something beyond yourself, and you're at the bottom of the rung and you're sleeping on the streets and you're at the, you've wasted your last dollar again and again on crack, you realize that there's got to be something better than just yourself, that you and yourself do not have enough strength. And so the first step of 12-step is, in AA, is that, that you're powerless over your addiction, and that you've got to believe in a higher power. And so the whole idea of a higher power, believing in God, is really to give us hope that there's got to be something beyond the mess that most people have made of their lives.
We have three basic components that are involved in an individual that becomes addicted to any particular drug or behavior. And that is, there's a physiological side to it, and there is a psychological, and there's a spiritual side.
If the ego hasn't developed sufficiently, then there's a suffering that comes and there's a neglect of that kind of work, and one has to go back and actually begin to do the strengthen the ego and develop that, so that one's caring for one's children, earning a living, whatever the particulars are, not participating in the addictive behavior. You actually have to do that work, and you can't just fluff ego development. You have to do that, and it's incremental. It's like strengthening your own body. I think the solution has to be answered in each individual person and each individual life.